Hey, this is Rob. This is episode 83 of the Folly Coffee podcast. Let's get it brewing. All right, I am here with Houston White. Let's go through the list here. Founder of Houston White Men's Room, the barbershop that you founded in 2007, the Black Excellence clothing line, and over 600 JCPenney's, and most recently the Target on Lake Street. Now founded the Get Down Coffee Co. And all the reading I'm doing, there's a lot of other things you were doing before that. It seems to be a lot more going on besides that, including an apartment building that you're going to be building out in the community of Camden Town. As I'm reading about everything you're doing, I think the thing that first occurred to me was like, a lot of business owners go, I founded this business to build community. And then you're like, all right, that feels nice to say, but here you are literally building a community around what you want to do. And we were just talking about on the way in that I go, as I'm opening Star Tribune today, of course, you're on the cover of the business section of Star Tribune. And then Jeff, our head roaster, literally yesterday out of the blue text, he really never does this. He's like, you know who you got to get on the podcast? You got to get Houston White on the podcast. I was like, I've got him coming in tomorrow. He's like, okay, you're good. But pumped to have you on. Really want to talk about your story because everything you do seems to be very, very motivated externally. It's not I think a lot of business owners, you see them starting business because they want to have their own independence. They want to grow wealth. They want to be successful for whatever number of reasons. And so I want to talk about your story and go all the way back to the beginning on growing up in Mississippi and Minnesota and how this led to this motivation you have to do what you do, because it's like almost incomprehensible the amount you do. So I'd love to just start at the beginning of your story, growing up in Minnesota and Mississippi, and kind of how that led to your entrepreneurial journey.
No doubt, man. First of all, thank you for having me. We've been trying to make this happen for a couple of months now.
Yeah, I wasn't going to stop emailing you, that's for sure.
Most recently, I had to go to Florida, man, so sorry I didn't make that one. But I'm here, man, and I'm excited. This is really cool. Great to meet you, man.
Great to meet you as well. Yeah, I guess that should be noted. This is literally the first time we've ever met.
No doubt. But, my journey, I'm a kid from Mississippi, right, as you noted. And growing up in Mississippi, which has a troubled history racially, right? But as a black kid, everyone around me owned a business of some sort or another. My grandmother was my first seamstress or stylist, I like to say, because she made all my clothes. And so I'm seeing my grandmother make clothes, my uncle build cars, my other uncles and dad, they build houses. And so as a kid, I jumped from place to place and industry to industry, imagining like how I could do that or play in that space. I used to go with my grandmother every week to the fabric store. And so, you could imagine if you're a kid on a job site seeing a house being constructed, your imagination expands, right? Like, I can do that. And so coming to Minnesota, it's a different world. I mean, great place, obviously, but as a kid who came from an environment where folks were just literally like in a village, going from thing to thing, just making that little community run to a place where you saw folks going to a bus stop to go to a town, right? Like, it's a very different reality. And so I've always been that kid that's been inspired by what I saw in Mississippi growing up. Is like, do for self, self-sufficiency, use your imagination, build things that benefit community. And I think it's just that, man. It's that's who I am inherently. This idea of like Minnesota talks about disparity, talks about the wealth gap, the education gap, between kids of color and white kids. And I think personally, being from where I'm from, it's directly related to community. So if I'm going to try to do something, you generally revert back to where you're from, and what inspired you. So it's just in me, man. It's inherent.
Well, it's funny you say the definition of entrepreneurship. It's a word I don't refer to myself much as entrepreneur, because it's almost got a negative connotation as to what that is. You picture, like the hashtag entrepreneur hustle guy, and it's got to be this or that. But true entrepreneurship is what you're talking about. In communities, people running their own businesses to serve the community. And it's kind of grown to this point that when you get to large cities or you get to more populated areas, entrepreneurship takes on this different meaning. And it's almost like kind of like, oh, that would be such a hard thing to do because it has to be this big, big thing to start. And I was reading a quote that one of your mentors told you, that you have to have the courage to keep it simple. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious what your thought process behind that, because it almost seems the opposite of what you would think, that, well, it doesn't take courage to be simple. That's easy or simple. What do you mean when you are taking your mentor's advice on you have the courage to be simple?
Well, it's like Warren Buffett said years ago, when folks asked him, why would you launch this company from Omaha as opposed to move to one of the coasts, right? All the businesses happening out east or out west. And he said, if I were in New York, I would have had 1 million stock tips, 1 million meetings, all kinds of folks telling me what I should do, where I should go. But being in Omaha and having like clarity allowed me to really think through what companies I wanted to invest in, to study them, because I wasn't chasing around being the Wall Street banker guy, right? And so for me, simplicity is just that. Like for years, folks are saying, well, why don't you take this great barbershop that you have that's upscale to a more populous neighborhood in New York or Chicago or DC? Or why don't you, try to scale your brand yourself via online, when I was building it up early on in 2015 and 16. But my goal was to make sure that it was really rooted in community. And people, if you Google me, there'd be a story, and it wouldn't just be this thing that just popped up with these great branding and colors and some copy that some really cool person from said agency created for you, but it's really real. And so keeping it simple means to stick to the script, right? If your goal is to win a championship in the NBA or NFL, you know what? We got to go back to the basics. We got to drill reps, compartmentalize our learning, compartmentalize our business strategy. And then when it's all good on its own, you put it together. And as they say, it takes 10 years to make overnight success. And that's really just compartmentalized thought and the simplicity of stacking block to block. And then you build something that's so integrated, so vertically integrated and strong that it's hard to knock it down.
And there's such a difference between simple and easy. I think a lot of people think you can swap those words out, and it's just not true. Something can be simple and very, very difficult to accomplish. And a lot of people go, well, if it was simple, everybody would do it. And you start to realize that you go, no, simple ideas executed with a lot of hard work and vision are what separates simple ideas from success. What do you consider to be your first kind of toe into entrepreneurship? Is there like an exact moment that you go, okay, this is the first thing I'm starting, or was it a little more organic than that?
Man, I started my first business when I was 7. I was in Mississippi, and on Saturdays, that was the day we didn't really have to work. I was 7. I grew up on the job sites. I had to go for a little while. I started when I was about 4 or 5. And then my mom would come pick me up after a couple hours. But Saturday was that day we just roamed, played with my cousins. And one of my uncles gave me a old lawnmower. And my grandfather was a small engine repair guy, and he fixed it for me. And so I had this lawnmower, and so I hired a couple cousins. I told them I'd pay them with candy. And, who doesn't like a young industrious kid, right? And so we had all kind of folks saying, we'll give you $2 to cut this field. In Mississippi, there's tons and tons and tons of open land. So it's hot as heck out there. And folks are like, well, let these kids go cut that grass down. And so we had tons of work. And I would end up at the end of Saturday when the sun's going down with like $30, $40, $50 sometimes. And I go buy huge bags of candy, and I pay all my cousins in candy. And that was like... I was just always been into this kind of do for self, try to figure things out. And at North High, well, before I got to North, I was about 12. I started painting T-shirts in the basement because the airbrush craze, the early 80s, the Velvet DeVoe, the whole thing. I got an airbrush, and I was painting T-shirts and selling them for like $3 a piece. And it just kind of, snowballed on itself. It's just one thing leads to another and another, and.
As you're airbrushing these T-shirts, what kind of things were you airbrushing on them? Did you have an idea of this is what I want my line of airbrush T-shirts to be?
You know what, man? I was just experimenting, copying stuff. Like I remember I had a line that said, sugar and spice. It was like the salt and it was so whack now when I think back. But it was like the salt and pepper kind of, with sugar and spice. And it was a bunch of young boys at Lincoln Elementary with sugar and spice on their. I mean, thank God there's not a picture of this. But and I would paint like a lot of characters, because that was the thing back then. And like painting portraits. So I was really trying to figure out how to like create these realistic images on the shirts because folks wanted you to paint a picture of them on their shirt. So
you've always had this hustle in you, it seems like.
Oh, yeah.
I was reading that you were building houses in potentially the worst time ever to be in the business of building houses in 2005 to like 2007. How did you find yourself in that line of work?
Yeah, so, from being from Mississippi, even when I lived in Minnesota, I went back to Mississippi every summer. And so a lot like the kids now who they grow up and their fathers work in the DOT or they work, they kind of grow up and they get grandfathered into that world where those really good high paying jobs working for the county, they just kind of get grandfathered into. And so that was my summer job in Mississippi. I worked on houses with my dad and my uncle. So I learned pretty much everything about building houses. And my uncle was very good friends with the builder, at several builders. And so I got to see, architectural drawings and got to experience a house from slab all the way till the punch list finish. And it was something that blew my mind. And so as I got older, I was about 21, I decided to buy a fixer-upper in the Camden neighborhood. Great bones, really close to the Parkway, but the bathroom was pink. The kitchen was probably the original kitchen from when the house was first built. And so it needed a refresh. And so I had all those kind of skills to do that work. My wife and I, we fixed it up. We had an open house and folks came and said, "Who did this?" I'm like, "Oh, we did it. We love this. Could you do my bathroom?" And then that just started a thing where I started doing bathrooms and then kitchens and then basements. And then we bought a house not too far away. We put an addition on. And that was my inroads into really building things. And then from there, I bought a piece of land out in Brooklyn Park. We built the house for ourselves. And then my cousin and then my other cousin. And then boom. That was late 2004, early 2005. And by 2007, we had done 40, 50 houses in the Brooklyn Park area just because we had a specific niche and that hustle, man, that grind. And that was kind of the story.
What happens when the 2008 financial crisis hits? What happens to that business?
I was building a $2.5-3 million teardown in Golden Valley at the time. I was 29 years old. That was like, heavy Rick Ross, Scott Storch days. And I'm like, we made it, right? We navigated the worst of it. And I got a call and the banks are like, especially my construction bank, they're like, our accounts are frozen, right? We can't disperse any more funds on this project. And that was like, whoa. And so got together with all the contractors and we talked and we all agreed to take a haircut and we sold that house for pennies on the dollar, man. And then I realized like I have built this great business, but I didn't have what I had in Mississippi was that central base. And that's when I said I got to use whatever I have left to buy a space, a place that no matter what happens in the economy ever again, that will be mine and something that I can go back to and an industry that will always be relevant no matter what's happening in the world. And so I bought the building in Camden Town and we began fixing it up.
And that's presumably what became the barbershop.
That's what became the barbershop and the community kind of mecca or hub that we're building our business out of now.
And how'd you get the word out about that as you're building it and starting a barbershop and really with the goal of creating community? How are you getting the word out that this is here?
It's a wild thing about how you build momentum and you inspire people. It's word of mouth at this point. We've been doing this for so long. We've hosted everyone at that shop, from Governor Walz to Archbishop Hebda, you know, to having a national night out where we partnered with the Final Four host committee and brought a whole basketball court to the middle of the street, you know. So it's become, and it had every single Saturday and a lot of Fridays, various events. You know, we in 2015, I told a lot of my clients and some of my closest friends that I was no longer going downtown Minneapolis on Fridays and Saturdays, because I realized that I was doing the very thing that I was complaining about, which was you're constantly taking your resources out of your community. You're reinforcing that mindset that your community is not good enough. So what I'm gonna do, and I started this, is just buy a bottle of wine, and then at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, we're gonna sit on the patio and just hang out. And it just started to build on itself, you know, and more people decided that made sense. And it just built a community and a movement of folks who had that same mentality that we have to build what we want.
And that idea that, like, oh, we got to go downtown to hang out because that's where everybody goes. And then you start to poke around and be like, why do you do it? Well, that's because what everyone else does. And you're like, well, why do you do it? Well, that's because everyone else does. And you go, well, what if we just hang out here? Would anybody want to hang out here? It's like, well, yeah, if Houston's hanging out there, I'll hang out. And then you get the word out that way. So this leads from a barber shop to a line of clothing that is now in 600 plus stores. And I'm like, when I read that number, I'm like, that is an inconceivable number of stores for someone to be in. And not to be glossed over either is that casual amount of time where you're like, oh, I was 21 and I started building up this house, to being 29 and working on that home that you had to sell for pennies on the dollar. It's 8 years of time. So I have to imagine you've built a good reputation and a network of people. But opening the barber shop, how soon after did the clothing line come to be?
The clothing line, or the statement for the one of the first lines, which is Black Excellence, came to be in 2012. There was an event. It's called the Hip Hop Mixer. And so, as you know, everybody has their favorite rappers. You know, it depends on who you are, how you grew up. And so we basically just created a poll that everybody would take, or it was kind of a sheet that said, well, who's your favorite rapper? And then there was a bunch of artists around who were displaying art. And so we had this event, and there was a videographer there, and they had interviewed me out front, and they were like, well, what are you trying to accomplish? And I said, I don't want black to be associated with lack, and I don't want hood to mean hole in the wall. We classy around here. We do it big, this idea of Black excellence. And so when I said that, he put that up on the video and the screen. I said, Black excellence, wow. I didn't even realize I kind of was saying, you're just talking, and I didn't know what and I'm like, we got to do something with that. That's powerful. And so we started to make a couple T-shirts that had Black excellence on it. Well, I started with the logo first, and I'm like, well, if we're going to do this logo has to be iconic, like a Nike swoosh or a Adidas, it has to be something that you just recognize. And so we worked for a while. I had a client who was going to MCAD, and he wanted to help, and we went through a ton of iterations. Finally got a logo that I thought, like, this is it. And then we produced the shirts. It took about a year and a half to get to a good place. And in 2014, we launched that spring.
So you're saying there's a little more thought than the airbrush T-shirts you used to be doing.
A bit more than that.
Did you bring back the sugar and spice line?
No, that was done. But to see all of those folks come out, and to see what that statement meant to the community, I'm like, this is powerful. And so there were other things that grew out of it, and it was like, I've always been into apparel design. I've always been into aesthetics and clothing and all of that. But I saw that, like a Ralph Lauren who built this line that was really about aspiration and inspiration, and just wearing it meant that even if you weren't a person that's ever been to a polo match, you were one of those people, right? And so I started to see the power in branding and clothing, and especially the idea of Black excellence, when a lot of young men from where I'm from were struggling with identity, and so that's kind of how it started, man. And then it just grew and grew and grew. And, we outgrew what we could sell at the barbershop. in 2019, in the 2018, 2019, the buyer for men's approached me about being in JCPenney for a Black History capsule. Would be the first time they would have ever done a Black History Month kind of capsule. And so we talked about it and agreed that we'd, do about 20,000 units and see how it goes. I mean, look, she had her neck on the line. If this doesn't work, it's not like we can just, sell these things. So when we launched in store, it would have been 2020, January 5th or 4th, 2 weeks after, completely sold out. And they realized that they didn't buy enough. And so fast forward, the pandemic is ravishing the community, the world, and then George Floyd's murdered, and then they're trying to figure out, we want to work with Houston again, but it needs to be a different conversation. And so I started to talk to them about the idea of one of my other lines that had emerged, which was Be the Change. And wouldn't it be something if we had active allies next to Black folks celebrating Black history in a year that has been very difficult? And so that led to 200,000+ units. And boom, right? Like, it's just this amazing situation if you build something authentically and it has a message that really resonates. And kind of what I thought would be the future of apparel, which is people are looking for something that has more meaning, it has more purpose. And then who made it and why did they create it?
Well, the authenticity is such a key part to what you're talking about, because it's very obvious in everything you do of why you're doing it, and you're looking to literally build community. And at any point in building that business, did you have people go, well, maybe you're focusing too hard? Are you limiting yourself to your customers by focusing on Black excellence? Do you want to maybe soften it up a bit so that it appeals to more people and there might be a broader outreach, or that key retailers might not want to take the risk on? Because I think retailers look at it like, especially a massive retailer like JCPenney's could look at a line like that and be like, well, that's a risk. And is that something that ever came up in the discussion of creating that brand?
Oh, of course it came up. I mean, folks are, it's like Henry Ford said, if you would have asked people what they wanted back when I was building this business, they would have said faster horses. That's the way people think.
I love that.
People think it's like you have to do you can't break the mold, right? You can't push that far. But I'm a believer that we have to, if folks can say Black Lives Matter, why can't they say Black excellence?
Exactly. Well, and it's so funny because it seems to me that the cultural shift that happened in 2020 was the corporate messaging of, it drives me nuts when you see the corporate messaging that's just like, we're with you. And you're like, okay, now what? And you're like, no, we did it. Didn't you see the commercial? Like, you saw the commercial, right? Like, we're with you. And you're like, but now what? And what you're doing is, I wrote this down before you came in, is culture plus capacity. This is such a cool idea, because the way you think about business and culture combined, I think creates a big differentiation in what you're doing, because most large corporations, especially previous to 2020, go, no, we did the commercial, we're good now. Mm-hmm. You're approaching businesses, say, you have the capacity for change, and you, as Houston, have the culture. So you're going to them with culture as a business proposition. And 2020, if anything good happened, is it made people reevaluate how they're making business decisions, and you've brought culture as a business to them. And unfortunately, at the corporation level, that's how shit gets done.
That's how shit gets done, man. The bottom line is, if you think about it like this, Dr. Dre produced The Chronic in a studio, probably a lot like this room we're in right now, right? Probably was a whole lot of weed smoke and a whole lot of stuff going on. But that he had that record finished, complete, and shopped it to 19 labels from New York to California, all over, and got rejected by all of them because they're like, whoa, that Eazy-E thing.
It's a bit much.
It's a bit much. This is not going to. And then it took Jimmy Iovine. And think of what happened. And Jimmy Iovine admits now that Dr. Dre was a huge part of the reason why his brand and his record label exploded in the way that it did, because he was always emergent, and signing groups like 9 Inch Nails and Gwen Stefani, like way out there, folks that most people will be like, that's not going to hit. You don't take her, and so many corporations have glossed over this idea of really partnering with folks who already have the chronic. They just need the machine to put the chronic out, right? And that's how I approach it. I already got the chronic. I already got everything that I just need your machine and your influence, and we can help each other. So we move this idea of social justice from a moral imperative to an economic imperative. You got to speak the language of business, and that's what it is at the end of the day.
And that cultural shift created this catalyst that they're going, we need this. And you're going, guess what? I've been building this for years now. Like you just need to have the capacity plus the culture that we've created over here. And that's the cool part about what you did is you formed it within a community and you built that brand as a community. And one of the things that stood out to me is, as you were saying, this is how it was built, is you found people that like swarmed to want to help with this. And I think there's probably a couple of reasons that happen. And, hindsight's 20/20 as I'm looking at this, but I think any great idea that happens is going to attract people for a number of reasons. The number one is usually like financial. People go, oh, this is a huge financial opportunity I want in. And usually that's a very shallow relationship. But what you were doing attracted people that say, I want to be a part of this movement. I want to be a part of changing the narrative behind what Black excellence could be. And just starting as a phrase that was in a video, going, oh, that needs to be something, and creating it to something that an initial order of 20,000 units, which seems huge, sells out in 2 weeks. So as they place this 200,000 unit order later, where does it go from there? I mean, this was just, I guess, like 8-9 months ago.
Yeah, I mean, we launched in 2021. You know how this thing retails always 6 months to a year ahead, so I get confused all the time. It's like we're planning stuff now for 2022, so it's just a wild world. But from there, Target stepped in and was like, well, okay, you did all of that, right, and that's great. But let's talk about what we could do together. And so that's where I am right now is in talks with Target Corporation about what does it look like to build a brand inside of the third largest retailer that really resonates, powerfully and really reflects a community, but also brings in more people to learn and share. And there's that culture plus capacity moment. And how do we make that happen in a much more impactful way that could lead to opportunities for other entrepreneurs and also become a blueprint of how you build communities all over the country.
And the culture plus, like, I couldn't stop coming back to culture plus capacity, because sometimes when you look at someone like yourself, like serial entrepreneur, so many endeavors going on, the number one thing you might hear is like, well, aren't you worried that you're losing focus on any one thing? Especially, we haven't even gotten to the Get Down Coffee Company yet. But you've positioned it in a way around culture plus capacity that's very easy now to explain why you're doing any facet of your business. And it's easy to go to these corporations. And I'm curious, in these conversations that you're having at like a corporate level, are those conversations what you expect? Like, what are those meetings like as you're trying to explain to them? Like, you're like, I'm building a community over here, and this represents what we're doing over here, and this is a product line, because you've got this like incredibly impactful, meaningful work you're doing. Then you're like, here's the price to you. Here's the margin that you would make, and here's how it fits in within like your current, summer line. Or you know what I mean? Like, here's how it fits next to this trend of apparently as a millennial, I can't wear skinny jeans anymore. So you're like, here's how it fits in within that side of the business. The irony is a lot of these conversations are like, teach us, right? That's cool. It's changed a lot. Like, when you talk about global sourcing, I'm listening. I'm not an expert in that, right? So that's where it's like, my turn to sit here and take notes. But when you start talking about the 5-6+ year feasibility study of seeing what moves people, that I have, and I can
articulate and show. And then when we start to talk about, because I'm all about show and prove, right? The Lake Street Target drop, I called it a Kanye drop. And I even said that in the meeting, like, this is our Kanye drop. We're just gonna, when it sells out, it's sold out, right? That's a part of culture. It's a part of the Supreme culture. It's like they drop however many shirts, when it's gone, that creates demand. It's a position of strength. And so we did, I don't know what the number of garments were, but to see that, like, just every day get sparser and sparser, and racks starting to, we started out with this big, huge area that was all full, and then every single day it's just shrinking. That was like proof positive that we can scale this shrinkage moment in not every store, but a lot of stores. And so it's these wild conversations of learning together, and folks being humbled enough to say, we know retail the way we've always known it. What we don't know is how to build, a story that impacts and brings in more people, more diversity, right? And that kind of thing. And so it's this real cool sharing moment, man. With the bank, for instance, I mean, you got Greg Cunningham, who has the lived experience, who's right next to Andy Cesari, who is a friend of mine and a mentor of mine. And I brought this to Greg, I don't know, maybe a couple years ago now, but we've had these conversations, just small iterative conversations. And December 27th, 2019, he and I went to the Hewing and had one of the most important business conversations that I've ever had in my life. We didn't know a pandemic was coming in a few months, and we certainly didn't know that Minnesota was going to be the social justice capital of the world, right? But that night, we were just two black men trying to figure out how can we combine our respective platforms to do something great for this city. And that's what the conversation was based on. And out of that, he went to work, I went to work. And the very first corporation that I brought this idea of culture plus capacity to was U.S. Bank inside of my barbershop. And it just, boom, sparked a little bit of a revolution, in the way we think about these kinds of transactions and how we work with people.
And having the courage to be simple. You're starting all of this out of a barber shop, dude. Like, it's crazy. Like, I think so many people think they have to have like a revolutionary new way of doing everything. And the funny thing is, you're doing the opposite. Is you're going to retailers being like, why not do it this way? Why not do the Kanye drop? When it runs out, it's out. Like, that's how we do a lot of our stuff. That's like, it's the reason people want to get it. It's cool. Like, you want something that like you can't get again if you don't get it this time. And they're totally like, well, that's not how we do it. And you're like, but this is how people do it. And why do you keep doing it your way? And why don't we do it this way? And it's incredible. We haven't even touched on the Get Down Coffee Code. So technically this is a coffee podcast on paper, but let's go back. So during all of 2020, my understanding from just like the different places I was reading about you is that you were planning on potentially like leasing or having a Dogwood open next to the barbershop so that there was great coffee within the community. How did it go from there to the founding of Get Down Coffee Co.?
Yeah, I mean, Dan Anderson is a dear friend of mine, one of the most awesome human beings I've ever met.
Owner of Dogwood.
Yeah. He and I have been getting to know each other and building a relationship for the last 6 years. And, over that time, I've grown to just love specialty coffee. You've been in this business it's like your favorite movie. Every time you watch it, there's something new right? And it's just interesting. And so when we were preparing to build this new development, I wanted great coffee and connected. And I said, and Dan was going to be shutting down the Calhoun Square cafe. And I'm like, well, I would love for you guys to just retrofit and bring Dogwood over north. That'd be awesome. And he agreed, and we kind of were just going on that track. Fast forward, George Floyd's murdered. Dan reaches out to me early June, and he says, Houston, can we go golfing? I just want to talk. And when we got out to the golf course, playing golf. It's a beautiful day. He even got me to do the Happy Gilmore. Dan's a hockey guy, right? So about on the 10th hole or something, we played, and it was awesome. But the conversation was, he said, "What do we do? What do I do? I have this business and we want to help, but what do we do?" And I said to him, I said, "Dan, I don't know exactly what you do, but as a friend, just don't be the donation guy, right? Don't give, don't pander to my community, because what happens is that moment, it recedes, and then people go back to life as normal and made you feel good temporarily, but it didn't have impact. So think about what you could do to create impact." Dan goes home, calls me a day or two later and says he wants to meet, comes to meet. And he says, Angie, his beautiful wife, said that he and I should start a business together. I'm like, no.
You're like, I'm busy.
I have enough things going on. And he said, no, hear me out. You said you wanted to create something to have more impact. The roastery is the bigger, better part of our business. And we can create impact by bringing a roastery to North Minneapolis and creating jobs, creating industry, knowledge, so on and so forth. That could really impact the community. And so I'm like, okay, I did say that.
Now he's speaking your language.
All right, we'll say more, right? Yeah. And so I told him what my limitations were and what I needed from him if we were going to do this. So we talked about a month or so about how this could go. And then boom, I agreed, and we started to ideate about what it would be called. And we were in the cupping room just noodling ideas. At first we were like blends, because this idea of merging things, and we had all these different thoughts. And then I said, the Get Down. And he said, the Get Down. And because I was planning to do a 2021 Fall Fashion Week event where I created jean jackets and like silk shirts, because, the disco era and the b-boying era converged to create hip hop. And so I always had this Get Down fashion collection planned. And I'm like, the Get Down, Dogwood, Houston White, Dan, it's got to be the Get Down, because I wanted to bring culture, and the same way I wanted to create that fashion moment is like this was a white space I saw in specialty coffee. And that's kind of how it got going, man.
Well, in specialty coffee, I say we, but we're very guilty of being very snooty and pretentious. And it is a very heavily like white culture. And it is the weird thing where like, I think it's a very inclusive community. Anybody I've encountered in the specialty coffee is very inclusive. And there seems to be a lot of forward progress to trying to increase diversity, but it is difficult if it's kind of like, it's not cool. like you're creating brands that aren't cool. How are you going to attract new people to join into it? And so it creates this community of people that like, you go to all these events and you're like, I see the same people every year, because everybody's creating brands that are attracting the same exact people. And then you come along with Get Down and I'm like, this is just cool. Like, this is how you attract new people into this category. And that's what we were talking about off mic before, that I'm like, I think some people are like, why are you like having all these competitors on your podcast and like hyping up your competitors and stuff? I'm like, because everybody's competing for the same small group of specialty coffee drinkers. And you can picture, the upturned mustache with some funky hat and like probably going to recommend a band that you've never heard of that they've seen, and by creating something that's just cool, you're going to attract coffee drinkers from other cultures, and then also people that just want to do like and drink cool stuff and be associated with that brand. Then when it's great coffee, they go, oh, also it's great coffee, by the way. And so the way you're approaching it from like the lens of a fashion designer is really interesting. And I think sometimes, especially in food and beverage, the people that tend to have success come from the outside. I come from the beer world. And so Folly's very heavily influenced by what worked in the beer world. And I'm like, I don't have these revolutionary ideas. I just go, they're working over here. Why won't it work over here? And so you're over here in the fashion world going, well, that's going to be really cool. Why don't we do that in the coffee space? And by doing that in a very like a purely non-pandering way, you're going to attract people to want to try it, to want to drink this style of coffee and build a new culture around it. And like, those are the types of businesses that are truly impactful. And another thing you said that really resonated with me is the donation thing, that it's like, look, we're a really small business, and like it's not like we have a bunch of cash to throw around. And so I've always been like, I wish we could donate more. But then realizing that's like, it's not donations that are long lasting. If anything, like charity or donation can create the opposite effect, that if you have ongoing charity or donation, it can create dependence on those donations. And what you're doing is like building things that are going to be long lasting. And I read another quote, is that the thought of what can I build that will have impact for 100 years? I'm quoting it wrong, but that idea is really cool. You're not taking the hashtag entrepreneur thing where you go, what business can I build for 5 years that has great margins, is scalable, that will be purchased, and I can flip it for millions? You're building a business through that. And that's why something in competitive categories like coffee or fashion, I think that's why it's working. And obviously there's a lot more going behind closed doors that we just met, but I'm going, it's impossible not to see the authenticity behind what's happening. And it's so cool to see that.
Yeah, it's interesting, man. Like I obviously coming off of a business that I thought was going to make me a billionaire when I was 26, 27, and we were doing all this cool stuff. And I'm like, sky's the limit, right? That's all I could see. And then experiencing people that I loved, and then watching on TV folks jumping out of buildings because their stock portfolio lost 60% in value. That taught me a lot. That stuck with me, is that folks were more interested in their net worth than they were of their net benefit, to community, to their family. The way you commit suicide because you lost money. And so that forever made me focus on my passion and impact. I could have made a fortune if I stayed in real estate over the last 13 years. I haven't touched real estate because I lost my passion for it because of what I experienced. I love to build things. I love real estate in the sense of like creating spaces, but it would have just been a money play for me if I would have stayed in it, because I was depressed at 30 years old, because now what, right? And when I figured out what next, I said that I have to go a mile deep and an inch wide and not be this guy that, is just very topical and making money. And I did do that. I gave money to my old basketball team in 2005 and, showed up to take the photo and that's cool, but that doesn't have impact. I need to be teaching these young men and women how to fish so they don't need me anymore. That's the whole idea, especially in communities of color. We suffer from not just a wealth chasm, but it's a knowledge chasm and a relational chasm, and is business growth as much as about who you know as what you know. And so I wanted to be someone that could help bridge that gap and create a whole bunch of liberated entrepreneurs that are able to donate money or do whatever the hell they want to do. Right? There's not this vacuum of there's this one thing and everybody works for this company. Right? I don't want that. And
you're doing it in a way that's generating revenue. And that's the crazy thing, is I think a lot of people with your vision would be like, I need to form a foundation and go out and get those donations, and then I'll do the work. And it's like, you're creating businesses that are going to create jobs. And then when people are in those jobs, they're going to be in this business and see how the inner workings of business work, similar to when you were in Mississippi and saw businesses of just going to pick up fabric, that you go, oh, this is a business. It's a simple idea, but this is an entrepreneurial endeavor. You're in business for yourself. And it's absolutely so cool to see. And so what are the plans now? I think I read today that you broke ground on the Get Down Coffee Code. That's going to be like in the same building the roastery is as the barbershop. Is that correct?
Well, so what we broke ground on was we're going to build a new barbershop, and then the space that we currently are in, we're going to gut it and it's going to be the first front-facing get-down cafe. So it's going to be very experiential. You know, the Red Wing boot up in, we're going to create kind of a boot moment, right? Like, so this becomes a destination. It's going to be very interesting and unique. Full-time DJ booth, just a lot of really cool stuff in coffee.
For context, for anybody listening, Red Wing is probably heard of the shoe, but it's literally in Red Wing, Minnesota. And when you go to their flagship, like headquarters store, there is a booth that's like 10 feet tall. And everybody's seen it if you're from Minnesota.
Absolutely. And you travel up there just to see it, right? Yeah. And so that's what we want to do, is create this destination and this draw. The 2-year goal, we're going to identify space, place, or a piece of land and build a roastery in North Minneapolis. I mean, you think about Surly, right? The as big as that brand and that business has grown. And I mean, you're from the craft beer world and you understand, I mean, that brings a lot of jobs. We're making things. We're bringing back what made America the beacon of hope in the world, is that people have an opportunity to dream and then create. And then that business or that industry that you create catalyzes community, you know? And so that's the whole idea. And that's going to be basically a 2 to 3 year process, just depends.
Yeah, and going back to what you said about like having success in real estate and realizing that I could continue even after the crisis to make a lot of money in this, but to see people's lives ruined because their stock portfolio got messed up, is you kind of realize that money can get taken from you at any time, especially when it's primarily controlled by banks. When you do business or stock portfolios, it's someone else's like, it's someone else's work that's influencing your own wealth, and like you building the house, and then the bank was like, sorry, no more, versus building a community. Somebody can't come in and just be like, hey, we took your community. They're like, no, like we built this. Like this community can't just be taken in the way that like wealth or money can be taken. And on like a much smaller scale, it's funny, Jeff and I had this conversation that it was a while ago, but it was a especially stressful week, and he was just like, orders to the gills, and like, you know, it was a tough roast week and things just weren't perfect like he wanted. And I go, you know what, man, like even if we went out of business tomorrow, we still spent the last few years doing what we want to do, meeting awesome people, and we're going to be okay because of the people that, like this community of people that we've met and become a part of. And that was kind of a cool moment for me, that I was like, all right, if we go out of business, I think I'll be able to land on my feet, not because I've generated a ton of wealth or because I have money to throw around to do anything else, but at the core of it is like the community of who you surround yourself really, I think, is much more impactful to your happiness or your well-being than how many zeros you have in a bank account. And, you know, coffee is probably, there's a lot of people. One thing I love about coffee and the industry is it's not the most profitable industry. If you put the same amount of work into building other types of brands or products, you definitely make more money. But you find people that are in coffee because of what you said, that every layer you start to peel back, there's something else that's really amazing about it, whether it be that if we can sell better coffee from all the way down to the origin, to benefiting the origin and the growers, and they're going to be able to be more economically sustainable, to just taking business from the mega corporations that are making crappy coffee and having that money live in our community and being consumed by people that we know.
Absolutely.
I can tell you from our online orders, I could probably tell you exactly who most of them are, even if we haven't met, because they've ordered before. And that was kind of something that I struggled with early on in business, which is ironic because this is how you started yours. Is when I first started Folly, almost all of our online orders were people I knew personally. And that made me feel like a phony, because it's like, this isn't a real business. These are just people I know doing me a favor. Versus thinking about it now, that's more important than anything, because what you did is you started that way. Is no, this is our community. I want it to be people I know. I want this to be built by people that I know personally. And that might be kind of the conflict between, I've never really lived in that small community. I've never lived in that, like, where everybody is self-starter and sustaining the community. And so maybe because I grew up in a way that I never viewed it that way, that was phony, because I wasn't the hashtag entrepreneur guy. And looking back on it, hearing what you say is a really cool way to kind of be like, oh, maybe that's why this is working for me to a certain level, is because it's built on the backs of the community and people I know and the support of others. And it's just really cool. And so you've got the barbershop, you've got the roastery being built on 2 years, you've got Black Excellence, and now the Be the Change line going. You're in JCPenney's, you're talking to Target. Is there anything else you've got on the horizon that you're working on, or is this what you're focused on for the time being?
This is what I'm focused on. There's a development arm brewing. It's a culture plus capacity moment as well. A huge firm that I just bring the culture to, right? And then we can figure out how to impact communities all over this country and do it in a way that doesn't appropriate or displace. The big gentrification issue, right? Like, if you look at Uptown, and a place that I grew up loving to go to Uptown, and big development came in, and that community, I believe, lost its soul. And it's that large developers have to learn. Right? There's nothing wrong with building amazing buildings. There's nothing wrong with the cap that you need. All of that's fine. But what you have to have at the table is someone who helps you figure out how to design programming that is going to still attract community, and these developments are still going to be soulful. It's kind of like if you think of the impact of a place like First Avenue. You can't just knock it down and say we're going to build a skyscraper here and then we'll put a First Avenue on the first floor. No, we have to build it. We have to respect what that means, and we can't just chase profit when thinking about building community. And so that I'm working on.
It's funny you say Uptown, because it really is just like no one goes there anymore, because there's nothing there that you couldn't go other places in the country or go into other places and see the exact same stores. You go to Mall of America and see the exact same stores that now seem to populate Uptown. And it could be argued that the better business strategy would be to turn down the short-term profitable stores that are national chains, because I think a lot, especially in real estate, I would imagine that if someone like a national chain came in and said, we want to put a store here, they're going to be the priority because it's a safer option. It's an established name. They're going to be able to pay the bills, even if the store is not profitable. But then when every store becomes that, the customers stop showing up for the reason that they started showing up in the first place. So there is a way to shift that argument of don't just do this because it's cool or because like this Uptown's kind of lame now. Do it because the reason the customers are here is what you should be focused on. It shouldn't be that short-term 1 year, 5 year lease that we know we're going to get paid for those 5 years. But that's such a difficult thing to convince anyone of, is short-term profitability over long-term sustainability of an area.
It is, but one thing that we have now is the entire world paused. And I always, as an entrepreneur, as a business person, I'm always looking for those moments to pounce. I think of myself as a business guy a lot like Ali fought Frazier. I hang out on the ropes until there's that moment, and then you go. And this is that moment, where the entire world is reckoning with all facets of business, from how much real estate do we need to how do we create a more of a shared model. And this is that time to redefine what everything from retail, from the apparel to grocery to development, to what DEI looks like, to the communities that are going to be developed, all over the country, right? We suffer. Chicago has a real challenge trying to figure out how we get those young men, particularly, motivated to do something different, or how we don't just come in and throw away a whole community and replace it with, and that's not just going to be decided by some developers that have a balance sheet. there's cultural understanding and nuanced way of doing this that's going to have to happen, and it's going to require somebody who's culturally adept at that table, you know. And so this is that opportunity.
Yeah, you can't make that up. It has to be authentic. You can't you just can't make up on a business sheet and be like, well, these seem to be the trends, so let's just form a brand around that. Because if anything, consumers are more intelligent and have more access to resources than ever. And the ability for the consumer to sniff out bullshit it's impossible not to. And that is another part of last year that I think people thought a lot more about where they're spending their money, which stores they're shopping at, how they're consuming things, why they're consuming things. And it is an opportunity to go back and say, the consumer is demanding this. So it would be stupid not to do this. By the way, I'm your guy to do it. So have me come in. I'm talking about you as if I'm me, but have Houston come in and develop this area because I'm doing it up north and we're doing it right. And look at and it's just so cool to see that. And I honestly look at what you're doing as very inspiring as to having core authenticity to what you're doing and having that guide what you do. And I can't wait to see everything as it's built out. It's going to be so cool.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. This is awesome. And the coffee community, I love what you said, because any car dealers or restaurants, what do? They want other restaurants and other car dealers in proximity. You know, we don't have to compete. We can inspire, and steel sharpens steel. So I love what you said about the specialty coffee community not having to compete with one another, but figure out how we can bring in more consumers and have them enjoy this beverage that we've grown to love and understand why it's different, you know?
And you attract it by doing cool stuff. Like, that's what it is. You don't just do what everybody's been doing and go, this will work. We'll find new people. No, you won't. And so to see the Get Down Coffee Co. come along and be like, this is so radically different from anything I've seen in coffee. And instantly the amount of publicity, the successful Indiegogo, the attention. I mean, I couldn't go anywhere for like 3-4 weeks without reading about Get Down. That's why I reached out to you to come on the podcast. I go, anytime I see that, it means somebody's doing something so right that people have to pay attention. And then I'm like, I need to get them on the podcast to figure out how the heck did he do all of this? It's insane. And it reminds me of like this study they did about why do you always see Pepsi and Coke machines next to each other? You would think they'd have enough money to go to a store and be like, I'm putting a Coke machine here. Contractually, you're not allowed to put a Pepsi machine next to it. People are more likely to buy one. Both sales of machines go up if there's a Pepsi and a Coke machine, because then as people pass by, they're not deciding, should I have a pop, should I have a soda or not? They're deciding, should I have a Pepsi or a Coke?
Absolutely.
And that's how I look at the specialty coffee community when it's, let's say Starbucks is the store out front. They're not deciding, should I have a specialty coffee or not? They're deciding which one. And people who are into high-end stuff tend to try a lot of it, and they rotate what they try. And that's what I love about this is a Folly drinker isn't just a Folly drinker. They are going to be a Get Down Coffee drinker. They're going to be a Dogwood drinker. They're going to be enough people that get into it that all of these businesses are going to thrive. And like being from the craft beer world, that's what you saw on that side, is that industry exploded. And then the breweries that aren't lasting are the ones that chase the pure short-term financial gains. Mm-hmm. And the ones that are surviving are the ones that build their community. When you look at like Surly and what they did, they could have invested all of their money into a huge national distribution push. Instead, they said, we're going to open the most badass tap room maybe in the country. I mean, it's arguable that it could be one of the best in the country. And now that place is so ingrained in the community that they're going to be around for 100 years. Versus other breweries were like, we got to chase those short-term financial gains because distribution is there and people are throwing money at craft beer, overextend themselves, and now you see them going out of business left and right. And so that mile deep, inch wide is like such a great insight as to like how to grow a business that people want to continue to be a customer of and feel connected to versus just the business side of the money-making opportunity. But I know it's a great episode when I'm like, I got to re-listen to this to make sure I didn't sound stupid as I'm rambling about the things. I just get like really excited, and it's so cool hearing your story, and I know this thing's going to blow up. And thanks again for coming on. I'm really glad we could find the time.
Man, thanks for having me, bro. It's a pleasure.
I'll end it like I do every other episode and say, have a nice day.